Good morning, St. Peter's. Oh, I better get changed to make it look like it's a different day. So it doesn't look the same as the one before. Okay, that's a bit different. Good morning, St. Peter's. We're doing Matthew 5:21 to 26 today, this morning. And being a child of God means participating in the reign of His kingdom in our lives. What does that mean? Last video I said at the end that Jesus has some very practical, simple information on acting childish. Well, I hope I can show you that this morning. There are three parts. In the next sections that we're going to be looking at over the next few devotions, we'll see adult behaviour, we'll see a vicious cycle that leads to adult type behaviour, and then thirdly, childish behaviour. Jesus gives us a way out. The first is adult behaviour. Have a look at verse 21. Or just listen. 5:21. You have heard it said to our ancestors, do not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. This is the law. Do not murder. Judgment results. This is pretty good. In our kingdom, in our society, I suppose there are a whole bunch of other things underneath murder. There are things like assault, perhaps insult and slander, and a whole bunch of other things graduated underneath that. Do not do any of this violence, and you'll be subject to judgment. That's a good thing. But you see, Jesus, remember, is talking about adultish behaviour. And what we tend to do is we find the law, do you remember? Do not murder, and we'll be subject to judgment. Or maybe do not assault, and we'll be subject to judgment. And we tend to say, well, we're underneath that, and so we should be okay. We minimally obey so that we can just be okay. Jesus says that this kind of behaviour leads, this kind of obedience to the law leads to a vicious cycle. And this is how it generally works out. Look at verse 22, or just listen. This is the vicious cycle, the escalation of violence. But I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Whoever insults his brother is subject to the court. Whoever says you fool is subject to hellfire. So Jesus is saying, you know the law, and do not murder and so on, you'll get subject to judgment. But then Jesus is saying, well, let me tell you about anger. Anger means you'll be subject to judgment. And then he goes a bit further and he says, if you insult someone, you'll be subject to the court. He's talking about his day. And then he goes a little bit further and he says, if you call them a fool, you condemn them, you'll be subject to hellfire. Jesus is talking about, in his time, anger that leads to worse and worse violence. And so he starts off with anger in the heart, that's subject to judgment. Then he talks about insulting someone, being subject to the court. This is what would happen in Jesus' day. And then he talks about condemning someone. That means calling someone a fool, but cursing them and actually saying there's no chance of them coming back, condemning them. And Jesus says they're subject to hellfire. But notice, this all starts with anger in the heart. And Jesus uses the exact same phrase as he used with murder. So Jesus is saying adultish behaviour tends to look at murder and go, well, murder means being subject to judgment. Well, I'm not like that at all. But Jesus says anger means being subject to judgment. Well, how are we to be delivered from this? Jesus says, get childish. And he gives us the initiative, because notice it's a childish initiative of what the child of the Father does. Listen, so if you're offering your gift on the altar, and you remember your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift, go and be reconciled, reach a settlement before you'll be thrown into prison. Basically, these are all initiatives by the child of the Father. If you know someone has something against you, a child of the Father, takes the initiative to go and be reconciled. They deal with their anger. And they go and they try and be reconciled. This is what it is to be participating in God's kingdom of righteousness and of his mercy and goodness. It is to deal with our anger through reconciling. Now, how can we do that? Well, children learn to trust their father and his judgment. When they find themselves casting judgment on others, they learn to trust their father's judgment. Because notice it says in the passage, when someone has something against you, instead of falling into judgment, they try to reconcile as quickly as they can. Consider that Jesus had a lot of people against him. Just quite a few people against him. And how did he respond? Listen to 1 Peter as we finish. 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 23 says, when he was insulted, he did not insult in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. Jesus knew that the Father is the King of all righteousness, and he will judge justly. And so he was able to bless those who insulted him and love those who persecuted him. And the children of the Father do that. And they do that depending on his grace and his goodness. Tomorrow we'll look at the next section and see those 3 parts again. See you then.